Excuse me. Cynthia snapped, just moments before she shoved Autumn's wheelchair with both hands, sending pasta, strawberries, and lemonade splashing across the little girl's sunflower dress. Gasps rippled through the garden party as the HOA president sneered, "This is why special kids shouldn't be dragged into public spaces." What she didn't know was, she had just picked a public fight with a mother who happened to be a federal civil rights attorney. Can you imagine watching an adult shove a wheelchair, hard, just because a disabled child lightly brushed against their designer sandals? That's exactly what happened to my 9-year-old daughter, Autumn. But what Cynthia Langford didn't realize was that behind that little girl with flowers painted on her wheels stood a mother with a federal badge, a spine of steel, and years of courtroom experience in fighting for people just like her daughter. I'm Danielle Brooks, and this is what happens when the wrong person tries to humiliate the wrong family. 3 weeks ago, Autumn and I moved into Magnolia Hollow, an upscale gated community nestled just north of Dallas, Texas. The name alone sounded like something out of a storybook, promising winding walking trails, sparkling fountains, and friendly neighbors. After years of bouncing from cramped apartments to outdated rentals, I'd finally been able to purchase a home with the accessibility features my daughter needed. Autumn has a rare form of dwarfism that affects her joints and spine, and while she's smaller than most kids her age, her imagination and spirit are bigger than any room she's ever been in. Her wheelchair was her own personal masterpiece, covered in hand-painted daisies, sunflowers, and bluebonnets, each bloom radiating joy and defiance. "Mom," she said while we were unpacking boxes, "do you think kids here will like me?" My heart broke a little at the question. At her last school, some kids had been cruel. Others just didn't know how to treat someone different. "Of course they will," I said, kissing her forehead. "You're the coolest artist I know." She grinned. "I added a new rose on the wheel today. Red means brave, right?" I nodded, trying to ignore the lump rising in my throat. Autumn had always used flowers to speak where words sometimes failed. A week after settling in, we received a glossy invitation slipped under our door, "Magnolia in Bloom, Annual Summer Garden Party. All residents welcome. Dress festively. Fun for all ages." It sounded like the perfect way to help Autumn make friends. And after all, how could anything go wrong in a place called Magnolia Hollow? The afternoon of the party arrived bright and warm. Texas heat pressed down on the neighborhood like a wool blanket, but a breeze carried the scent of lavender and honeysuckle from the surrounding gardens. Autumn wore a white dress with painted sunflowers along the hem, her own design, and I braided yellow and orange ribbons into her curls. "Let's go meet our new world," I told her as we made our way toward the clubhouse, nestled behind rows of blooming magnolia trees. The first thing I noticed? No ramps. Just a set of brick stairs leading up to the main patio where the tables were arranged. I gritted my teeth and guided Autumn across the grass, careful to avoid sprinkler heads and uneven soil. She didn't complain. She rarely did. But I noticed how tight her hands gripped the wheels. The party was already in full swing. Kids darted around tables, adults clinked glasses, and a long buffet table shimmered with everything from deviled eggs to peach cobbler. A woman stood near the center in a lemon-colored dress and a posture so perfect it looked painful. Her smile was sharp and didn't reach her eyes. That was Cynthia Langford, the HOA president, exactly as described in the community welcome packet and exactly as insincere. Her eyes landed on Autumn's wheelchair like it was a bug in her salad. "Let's get you something to eat, baby," I said, guiding Autumn toward the buffet line. That's when we met Elijah Tran, a tall, soft-spoken man in a paint-stained button-down shirt. "You must be the new family on Camellia Lane," he said, crouching to Autumn's level. "I'm Elijah. I teach art at Ridgeview High." He pointed at the painted lilies on her wheel. "You have serious talent. You ever try oils?" Autumn's face lit up. "Mom says I'm too messy for oils." "Messy is the whole point," Elijah said with a wink. She giggled, and I felt a brief moment of peace. A moment where someone saw my daughter, not her condition, not her chair, just her. But that moment shattered in an instant. As we reached the buffet, I realized the table was set far too high for Autumn to reach anything herself. I began preparing a plate, carefully describing the choices. Mac and cheese? Or the cucumber salad? Mac, please. And maybe some strawberries? I nodded. Coming right up. Just then, someone behind us sighed loudly. Some of us have been waiting a while, a woman said, clearly irritated. We'll just be a moment, I replied, polite but firm. It's fine, Darlene, came Cynthia's voice like ice water. Some people just need special allowances. The word special dripped with condescension. I kept my face neutral. I've argued in front of federal judges without flinching. But when it came to my daughter, rage flickered just beneath the surface. As I reached for a cup of lemonade, a young boy ran past behind us, bumping Autumn's chair slightly. It wasn't much, barely a nudge, but the chair rolled back a few inches, gently touching the toe of Cynthia's white leather sandal. What happened next unfolded like a bad movie in slow motion. Cynthia looked down like she'd been personally attacked. Excuse me, she snapped, as if Autumn had done it on purpose. I'm sorry, Autumn said immediately, her voice barely audible. It was an accident. But Cynthia wasn't interested in apologies. With a sharp, deliberate motion, she shoved the wheelchair away from her. Hard. The tray on Autumn's lap slid. The lemonade tipped. Pasta and strawberries flew onto her white dress. Autumn gasped, more from the shock than the temperature. Mommy, she whimpered, looking down at the mess spreading across her lap. Every conversation around us stopped. This, Cynthia said loudly, gesturing toward the scene, is why children like her shouldn't be brought to community events. It's disruptive. We're not a therapy center. My world narrowed to the sound of my daughter's stifled sobs. I knelt beside her. It's okay, baby. We'll get you cleaned up. I blotted at her dress with napkins, my hands trembling. That wasn't a slip. That was an attack. I got it all, Elijah's voice cut in. He held up his phone. I started filming when I saw the look on her face. You pushed that chair. Cynthia turned to him, her eyes wide. You're mistaken. That wheelchair rolled into me. I was protecting myself. Another voice chimed in, a woman I hadn't seen before. No, Cynthia. I saw it too. You shoved her. Don't lie. People were whispering now. Sides were forming. I stood up slowly and faced Cynthia, my eyes locked on hers. My daughter apologized for accidentally bumping your foot. What's your excuse for assaulting a child? Her nostrils flared. I'm the HOA president. I enforce standards. And maybe it's time someone enforced them on you, I said, deadly calm. Perhaps this neighborhood isn't equipped for families like yours, she added, loud enough for others to hear. We weren't designed for wheelchairs and medical needs. That was it. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I turned to Autumn. Let's go home, sweetheart. Elijah stepped beside us. I'll send you the video. You'll want it. Are you threatening me? Cynthia hissed. Don't forget we've discussed that noise complaint about your son's garage band. Go ahead, Elijah said flatly. Report it. But that footage is going viral if you try anything. As I wheeled Autumn away, her dress sticky and stained, she whispered, Why did she do that? Did I do something wrong? No, baby, I said, kneeling again to look her in the eyes. Some people see difference and feel fear. But that says everything about them and nothing about you. She blinked away tears. Are we moving again? The question sliced through me. I promised her this time would be different. No, Autumn. We're not going anywhere. But Cynthia? She just declared war on the wrong mama. The moment we got home from the party, I helped Autumn out of her sticky, stained dress and into the bathtub. She didn't speak much. Her silence was heavier than tears, and that scared me more than anything. While she soaked in warm water and bubbles, trying to scrub away the humiliation Cynthia had poured over her, I stepped into my study, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I wasn't just Autumn's mom. I was also a senior trial attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and Cynthia Langford had just handed me a case on a silver platter. Still, this wasn't about vengeance. This was about justice, for Autumn, and for every other child who's been made to feel like they didn't belong. I started by requesting digital copies of the HOA bylaws and the architectural guidelines. I dug through the public records database for anything on prior complaints, board meeting minutes, and neighborhood correspondence. It didn't take long to find red flags. There had been repeated requests from prior residents asking for an ADA-compliant ramp to the clubhouse, denied every time due to budget constraints. Meanwhile, I found an $85,000 line item approved last year for seasonal flower beds and ornamental fountains. Of course. Appearances over accessibility. I stayed up late that night, annotating documents and drafting a preliminary complaint memo, not to file yet, but to be ready. I wasn't just building a case. I was preparing for battle. Autumn slept fitfully, clutching her sketchpad. The next morning, she was quiet but determined. "Can we still go to the community pool sometime, Mama?" I steadied her face. "Are you sure? You said bullies only win if we give them our power." "I don't want to give her mine." My daughter's resilience was stunning. I kissed her forehead. "We'll go. And next time, we won't be alone." On Monday, I got a text from Elijah Tran. "HOA meeting this Friday. Emergency session. Cynthia's calling for a vote on new community standards." I texted back immediately. "Do you know the agenda?" "She wants to require pre-approval for mobility devices at events. Says it's about safety." We both know what that really means. I did. Cynthia Langford wasn't even pretending anymore. She was trying to codify her discrimination into HOA policy. That was illegal, and more than that, it was morally bankrupt. I reached out to a colleague of mine at DOJ, Jessica Martin. We'd gone to law school together. She was blunt when I recounted the incident. "She shoved your daughter's wheelchair? That's textbook battery and an ADA violation. Please tell me you're going after this." "I'm gathering evidence," I said. "I want to give them a chance to do the right thing first." "Send me everything you've got," she said. "If it escalates, I'll make sure it's reviewed at the highest level." By Wednesday, I'd received the full HOA financial reports and documented at least 7 ADA violations: no accessible ramp to the clubhouse, no pool lift, no accessible bathroom, and no designated accessible parking near the main entrance. I compiled it all into a binder, labeled, tabbed, and cross-referenced. I also printed stills from Elijah's video, showing the moment of the shove, Autumn's face afterward, and Cynthia's infamous line, "Children like her should be kept at home." On Thursday evening, I drafted my talking points for the meeting, aligning each one with specific provisions from the Americans with Disabilities Act, Fair Housing Act, and HOA governing law. I was ready. Friday came fast. I dressed Autumn in her favorite sunflower dress, the one with matching yellow flowers painted on her wheels. As we rolled toward the clubhouse, she whispered, "Are we going to get kicked out?" "No, baby," I said firmly. "We're going to plant something new." The clubhouse was packed. Chairs filled every inch of space except, notably, no room had been made for wheelchairs. Classic. I calmly asked the front row if we could remove a chair to make space. A kind woman helped, while Cynthia watched with barely masked disdain from the podium. "The meeting will begin shortly," she said without acknowledging us. At exactly 7 p.m., Cynthia called the meeting to order. As president of the Magnolia Hollow Homeowners Association, she began, her tone syrupy sweet, "It's my duty to protect the high standards of our beautiful community. Recent events have brought certain issues to light, particularly around safety and order at public gatherings." She distributed printed copies of her proposed amendment. Elijah, sitting behind me, raised an eyebrow as he read. I scanned mine. All residents requiring special accommodations or medical devices at community events must submit a request for board approval at least 7 days in advance. Equipment deemed hazardous to shared space access may be denied. The entire proposal reeked of exclusion. Cynthia looked pleased with herself. Are there any questions before we vote? She asked. Several hands went up. She pointed to a man in the back. What does this mean for strollers? He asked. My wife just had twins. Cynthia smiled. Of course baby strollers are allowed. This is about larger devices that can obstruct movement. Like wheelchairs? I said, loud enough to stop the room cold. Cynthia's gaze snapped to me. Ms. Brooks, we have a process. You'll need to be recognized. According to Section 58 of your bylaws, any homeowner may address the board for up to 5 minutes if the proposed amendment directly affects their access to common spaces, I said calmly. I'm invoking that right now. Cynthia opened her mouth to object, but I was already walking to the front. I turned to the room. My name is Danielle Brooks. My daughter Autumn and I moved here 3 weeks ago. You may have seen us at the garden party, where she was humiliated, had food thrown onto her, and was publicly insulted for using a wheelchair. Murmurs spread. I continued. What many of you don't know is that I'm a senior trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and what happened wasn't just inappropriate. It was unlawful. I turned to Cynthia. You shoved my daughter's wheelchair. That's assault. Then you said, and I quote, children like her should be kept at home. That is discrimination. I nodded to Elijah, who stood and held up his phone. I have the video. It's all there. Cynthia paled. That video is taken out of context. Would you like us to play it? I offered. We can connect it to the projector. That won't be necessary, Cynthia said through clenched teeth. What is necessary, I replied, is for this board to understand that the amendment you're proposing violates Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination in public accommodations, including HOA common areas. I handed a folder to each board member. Inside, you'll find a list of 7 current ADA violations at Magnolia Hollow. I've also included a proposed compliance plan, cost-effective, phased over 3 years, and fully aligned with federal law. I faced the room again. But that's not all. If this amendment passes, I'll be forced to file a formal complaint with HUD and DOJ, naming not just the HOA, but each board member individually. That could mean personal legal liability. The room was silent. Cynthia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. However, I added, I'm not here to threaten. I'm here to offer a path forward. I will not file if 3 conditions are met. 1. Cynthia Langford resigns as HOA president. 2. She delivers a public apology to my daughter. And 3. She completes disability sensitivity training at her own expense. A voice called out from the back. Seconded. Another, I support that. Hands began rising. The momentum had shifted. One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair, cleared his throat. I move that we reject the proposed amendment and adopt Ms. Brooks's compliance plan for review. Seconded, said another. All in favor? Nearly every hand went up. The vote passed. Cynthia stood frozen. You can resign now or wait for the federal complaint, I said quietly. Your call. Trembling, Cynthia scribbled her resignation and handed it over. The room erupted in quiet applause. As Autumn and I rolled out under the Texas night sky, she whispered, that was like a courtroom, wasn't it? I smiled. Sometimes the courtroom comes to you. And justice had just knocked on Magnolia Hollow's door. The night after the HOA meeting, Autumn fell asleep curled up against my shoulder, her sunflower-patterned blanket tucked under her chin. I watched her chest rise and fall, her fingers still smudged with paint from the little thank you card she'd made for Mr. Elijah Tran. On the front, she'd drawn her favorite flower, a red camellia, symbol of strength, and on the inside, in her neatest handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for standing up when I felt small." As I sat beside her bed in the quiet of our new home, I realized that something had shifted, not just in our household, but in Magnolia Hollow. The lines had been drawn. The truth had been seen. And more importantly, it had been believed. The following morning, I woke to a string of emails and voice messages. 2 board members had resigned their positions, stating they no longer felt aligned with the leadership culture of the previous administration. Another neighbor dropped off homemade muffins and a handwritten note, "We're so sorry for what your daughter experienced. Thank you for having the courage to say what we didn't." Autumn and I took a walk through the neighborhood later that afternoon, well, a role in her case. For the first time, no one looked away. No awkward stares. No whispers. Just polite smiles, small waves, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, we'd cracked something open. Cynthia Langford, as promised, submitted her resignation to the HOA. The board held a follow-up meeting within the week to formally accept it and appoint an interim president, Walter Henley, a retired architect known for designing public libraries across the state with a focus on universal design. I introduced myself after the vote. He smiled and said, "Ms. Brooks, I've been hoping someone like you would move into this community. We've needed a voice like yours for a long time." By the end of that meeting, I had been invited, unanimously, to join the board. Not for symbolic reasons, but because I had presented the most thorough, legally compliant ADA plan the community had ever seen. The first motion I brought to the table, establish an official accessibility and inclusion committee. Approved in under 5 minutes. Autumn sat beside me during that vote, her chin high, her wheels still painted with sunflowers and camellias. The committee's first project was one Autumn herself suggested, a community garden that could be accessed by everyone, walkers, strollers, canes, chairs. We decided to name it Autumn's Garden, a small patch of earth behind the clubhouse that would grow vegetables, herbs, and, of course, lots of flowers. Elijah Tran and his art students volunteered to build the signage. Each plant would be labeled in English and Braille, with hand-painted tiles designed by neighborhood kids. Autumn's idea, naturally. The day we broke ground, nearly 30 neighbors showed up. Some brought gloves and shovels, others brought snacks and lemonade. Walter arrived with a blueprint, and Cynthia, well, she didn't show. But her shadow no longer loomed over the space. A week later, we received official notice from her real estate office. She had listed her home and accepted an offer. Rumor had it, she'd moved to a luxury subdivision across town, one with strict HOA rules and no tolerance for public scandal. Before she left, she sent a typed apology through her lawyer. It read, in part, "I deeply regret the misunderstanding and any offense caused." I read it once, then tossed it in the drawer. But Autumn? She wanted to read it herself. After a moment of silence, she handed it back and said, "I still forgive her. But I don't think she knows why she's sorry." Out of the mouths of babes. As Autumn's garden blossomed, so did the neighborhood. Residents began re-examining accessibility beyond ramps and signs. We held monthly community forums, translated into ASL by a local interpreter. A small fund was established to help families with medical needs retrofit their homes. Someone even suggested installing a swing for kids who used wheelchairs at the neighborhood park. And it wasn't just about disability anymore. Inclusion became the ethos. Diverse speakers were invited to community events. Cultural nights featured music, food, and dance from across the globe. And one quiet afternoon, while I was watering the new marigold section in the garden, a young boy approached Autumn with a shy smile and a plastic pot in his hands. "Can I help plant something?" he asked. Autumn lit up. "Sure. This spot's for daisies." They knelt side by side, 2 kids who'd never spoken before, burying roots under the Texas sun. As I watched them, I realized this was bigger than an apology or a lawsuit. This was community healing in real time. Not because of a rule or a memo, but because one little girl with painted wheels had reminded everyone that kindness blooms when given a chance. 6 months later, I stood on the clubhouse patio, now fully renovated with ramps, railings, and a shaded seating area that welcomed every kind of neighbor. We were hosting Magnolia Hollow's first annual inclusion fair, complete with art booths, music, and a sunflower painting station that Autumn insisted on leading herself. Elijah stood beside me, sipping iced tea. "You know," he said, "when you rolled up to that first meeting, I had no idea the storm you were about to bring." I smiled. Neither did Cynthia. He laughed. "Think she's watching from her new gated kingdom?" "Maybe," I said. "But it doesn't matter. We're not doing this for her." I turned back toward the garden where kids were planting tulips and lavender in raised beds. "We're doing it for them." Autumn rolled past just then, her hands covered in potting soil, her face glowing. "Mom, Mr. Henley said we can put in a butterfly habitat next spring." "That's amazing, sweetheart. Can we call it the Camellia Corner?" I looked at Elijah. He grinned and nodded. "Absolutely," I said. "Let's make it bloom." As the sun dipped below the magnolia trees and lanterns began to glow along the garden paths, I thought back to that awful moment, the shove, the spill, the shame. It felt like a lifetime ago. And now, watching Autumn laugh with friends, surrounded by flowers and laughter, I realized something I'd always known but had never seen so vividly: justice doesn't always wear a robe or bang a gavel. Sometimes, justice smells like rosemary. Sometimes it sounds like children giggling while they paint flower pots. And sometimes, justice rolls forward on wheels covered in hand-painted blooms, strong and unshakable and loved. That night, as we walked home, Autumn said softly, "You were really brave, Mom." I looked down at her and shook my head. "No, baby. I just followed your lead." Magnolia Hollow had been changed, not by anger, but by courage. Not by paperwork, but by planting seeds. And justice? It grew quietly, persistently, beautifully, one flower at a time. At the heart of this story lies a powerful reminder: injustice can happen anywhere, even in quiet, beautiful neighborhoods with manicured lawns and smiling welcome packets. But more importantly, so can justice. What happened to Autumn wasn't just a personal insult. It was a reflection of how society still, all too often, fails to make space for those who are different. It reminds us that accessibility isn't a favor, it's a right. That inclusion isn't optional, it's essential. And that silence in the face of discrimination makes us complicit. Danielle didn't respond with rage, she responded with resolve. She used her knowledge, her voice, and her unshakable love for her daughter to challenge the status quo. But she didn't act alone. It took a neighbor brave enough to hit record, a new HOA willing to listen, and a community open to growth. That's the real power of this story. It shows that change doesn't require everyone to be loud, just willing. To those of you listening today, whether you're a parent, a neighbor, a teacher, or simply someone with a heart, your actions matter. Speak up when you see something wrong. Offer your hand to someone who feels invisible. Look at the world through the eyes of those whose paths are steeper, and ask, how can I help level the ground? And if you've ever felt different, out of place, or dismissed, remember Autumn. Remember her flowers. Her courage. Her belief that bullies only have the power we give them. Let this story remind you that you, too, can plant seeds of justice. You, too, can turn a moment of cruelty into a movement for change. Thank you so much for being here with us today. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please consider subscribing to our channel, Us, Justice Stories. We share powerful, real-life and inspired stories of everyday people standing up for what's right. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. From our family to yours, thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this journey toward a more just, compassionate world. See you in the next story.